tree of power continues to manifest. When the new Liberty Bell Center was built in 2003, architects were forced to deal with the shadow of the past. The building's orientation had to be exact, so that at 2 p.m. every day, the traditional time of the signing, the sun would hit the bell at an angle that illuminates the word Liberty through the glass. The bell remains a focal point for what some call the Great Experiment. It is a physical anchor in a world of shifting ideologies. Whether you believe in the secret societies of the 1700s or the cold, hard facts of metallurgy, one thing remains undeniable. The Liberty Bell was designed to be more than a bell. It was designed to be a pulse. It was meant to be the heartbeat of a new kind of civilization, one that is perpetually breaking, perpetually being repaired, and perpetually ringing in the ears of those who refuse to be ruled. As we look at the bell today, encased in its high-tech tomb, we must wonder, is the conspiracy over? Or is the bell still waiting for its next hidden guardian to pull the rope and awaken the frequency that once shook the foundations of an empire? By the late 1880s, the Liberty Bell had transitioned from a local Philadelphia relic into a national obsession. The wound of the Civil War was still raw, and the nation was a jagged landscape of resentment. To heal this divide, the government conceived an audacious, some said reckless, plan. They would take the bell out of its sanctuary and send it on a grand tour across the American wilderness. This was the era of the Iron Fugitive, a period where the bell traveled over 20,000 miles by rail, surviving assassination plots, train wrecks, and the literal threat of being dismantled by its own admirers. The logistics were a nightmare of Victorian engineering. A special gondola car was constructed, designed with a sophisticated suspension system of massive springs to protect the brittle bronze from the violent jolts of 19th century tracks. The bell was mounted on a throne of polished oak, surrounded by a brass railing. It was guarded not just by soldiers, but by a rotating crew of bell protectors who swore to give their lives before letting the icon touch the ground of a defeated or hostile territory. But as the train, the Liberty Bell Special, steamed out of Philadelphia, a shadowy opposition began to emerge. In the Deep South, radical groups who still viewed the bell as a symbol of Northern tyranny viewed the tour as an act of cultural invasion. In the North, anarchists saw the bell as a tool of the capitalist state. Secret Service reports from 1885 detailed a whispered plot to blow up the train as it crossed the bridges of the Ohio River. The goal was simple. If the bell fell into the river, the spirit of the Union would sink with it. One of the most terrifying moments occurred in the winter of 1893 during the journey to the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. As the train roared through the freezing plains of Indiana, a group of saboteurs had loosened the spikes on a remote section of the track. The plan was to derail the gondola car, sending the 2,000-pound bronze giant tumbling into a ravine where it could be broken apart and sold as relics. The train's engineer and veteran of the war named Elias Thorne felt a strange vibration in the rails, a harmonic scream that he later claimed came from the bell itself. He slammed on the emergency brakes just hundreds of yards before the tampered tracks. When the guards inspected the line, they found the sabotage. The bell had survived its first assassination attempt, not by human intervention, but by a perceived mechanical warning that bordered on the miraculous. But the danger wasn't just from enemies, it was from the bell's own lovers. At every stop, from tiny desert outposts to booming cities, thousands of people swarmed the train. The bell mania was so intense that people would throw themselves under the wheels of the moving train just to touch the bronze. Mothers would hold their babies up to the bell, believing that if the child's forehead touched the metal, they would be blessed with a life of freedom.
In New Orleans, the situation turned near riotous. A crowd of 50,000 surged past the police lines. People began bringing out hammers and files, attempting to chip away small pieces of the bell as souvenirs. The guards had to draw their bayonets to protect the bronze. It was a bizarre, beautiful, and terrifying spectacle. The very people the bell represented were the ones most likely to destroy it through the sheer violence of their affection. The most symbolic moment of the tour happened in 1915 during its final journey to the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco. The train crossed the vast, lonely stretches of the American West. In the middle of the night, in a remote part of the Nevada desert, the train stopped to take on water. Out of the darkness, hundreds of miners and their families emerged from the hills. They had walked for miles, carrying lanterns, just to stand in silence before the bell. They didn't cheer, they didn't shout, they simply knelt in the sand. As the sun rose over the Sierra Nevada, the bell sat on its flat car, glowing like a strange metallic god in the middle of a wasteland. It was the ultimate proof of its power. It had traveled from the refined cobblestones of Philadelphia to the rugged, lawless edge of the continent, and its message was the same. It was the connective tissue of a sprawling, chaotic empire. But the physical cost of these journeys was devastating. Every mile of track, every change in temperature from the humidity of New Orleans to the dry heat of the Mojave expanded and contracted the metal. The famous crack began to microscopically widen. Historians believe that these railroad years did more structural damage to the bell than the entire Revolutionary War. By the time the bell returned to Philadelphia for the last time in 1915, it was exhausted. The city council declared that the bell would never again leave its home. It had done its duty. It had stitched the country back together with a thread of bronze. It had looked into the eyes of the cowboys, the slaves' grandchildren, the immigrant laborers, and the elite, and it had seen the same hunger for liberty in all of them. The iron fugitive was home, but it was no longer just a Philadelphia bell. It carried the dust of the Great Plains, the soot of the southern coal mines, and the salt of the Pacific Ocean in its grain. It had become a veteran of the road, a weary traveler that had seen the true face of the nation it helped create, a face that was scarred, beautiful, and desperately in love with the sound of a bell that could no longer ring. As the mid-20th century arrived, the Liberty Bell moved out of the realm of pure history and into the cold, sterile light of modern laboratory science. While the public saw a symbol, scientists saw a complex metallurgical puzzle. In the 1960s and 70s, a team of specialized researchers, including materials scientists and nuclear physicists, were granted permission to conduct the most invasive checkup in the bell's history. They wanted to know why the bell cracked, how it was holding together, and if there was something hidden deep within the bronze that historical records had missed. What they discovered was a molecular diary, a record of every fire, every freeze, and every strike of the hammer etched into the very atoms of the metal. The first shocking discovery came from neutron radiography. By bombardment with subatomic particles, scientists could look through the 2-inch thick bronze as if it were glass. They found that the interior of the bell was not a solid uniform mass. Instead, it was filled with inclusions, tiny bubbles of gas and pockets of unmelted impurities. These were the ghosts of Pass and Stow's frantic recasting in 1753. Because they had worked in a primitive furnace in a Philadelphia alleyway, the metal was dirty. It contained microscopic fragments of slag and charcoal. These impurities act like stress risers. Every time the bell rang, these tiny pockets of air acted like internal lightning rods, focusing the energy of the vibration into the weakest points of the metal. The crack wasn't just an accident, it was a mathematical certainty. The bell was literally born to break. It was a flawed masterpiece from the moment the molten metal hit the mold. But the most mysterious finding came from chemical analysis of the trace elements. Alongside the copper and tin, scientists found an unusual concentration of gold and silver. In the 18th century, it was a common superstitious practice for wealthy citizens to toss their personal jewelry, rings, coins, and crucifixes into the melting pot of a communal bell to sanctify the metal. The analysis suggested that the Liberty Bell contains the melted-down remnants of hundreds of individual lives. The wedding bands of colonial brides, the silver shillings of merchants, and the family heirlooms of the poor are all fused together in that bronze. The bell is, in a very literal sense, a communal soul. It isn't just a government object. It is made of the actual possessions of the people who stood in the streets of Philadelphia in 1776. This explains why people feel such a visceral, magnetic pull toward it. They are looking at the combined essence of their ancestors. In the 1990s, a new experiment was conducted using acoustic emission technology. Sensors so sensitive they could hear a pin drop in a vacuum were attached to the lip of the bell. The scientists wanted to see if the crack was still alive. What they heard was terrifying. Even in a silent room, with no wind and no visitors, the bell was talking. It produced high-frequency clicks and pops.
Some researchers suggested that the bell's molecular structure changed during its famous winter journeys across the country. Exposure to extreme cold may have turned the tin into a brittle phase, a phenomenon known as tin pest. This chemical rot may have turned sections of the bell into a substance that is more like glass than metal. This is why the bell is now kept in a strictly controlled environment. Even a sudden change of 5 degrees in temperature could cause a catastrophic shatter event that would turn the icon into a pile of bronze dust. Furthermore, a group of fringe scientists investigated the electromagnetic signature of the bell. They found that because of its shape and its specific metallic composition, the bell acts as a massive antenna. It picks up low-frequency radio waves from the atmosphere. In a sense, the bell is always listening to the world. Some theorists argue that the bell has absorbed the electromagnetic noise of the last 2 centuries, from the first telegraph signals to the modern saturation of 5G waves. This scientific deep dive changed the narrative of the Liberty Bell forever. It proved that the bell is not a static object. It is a dynamic, changing, and fragile entity. It is a living fossil. Every microscopic click recorded by the sensors is a reminder that the bell's time is limited. It is a race against physics. The day Liberty rang was the moment the bell's heart started beating, but science tells us that the heart is weary. The atoms are tired. The metal is reaching its fatigue limit. This makes our preservation of it even more urgent. We aren't just protecting a piece of history, we are protecting a physical miracle that by all the laws of science should have fallen apart 100 years ago. The fact that it still stands, holding its breath in that glass pavilion, is the ultimate defiance of the laws of the universe. As the year 2026 dawns, a quarter millennium has passed from that sweltering July day in Philadelphia. The world has transformed from a collection of horse-drawn colonies into a digital, globalized civilization. Yet the fascination with the Liberty Bell has reached a fever pitch. This is the era of the semi-quincentennial, and the bell is no longer just a relic. It has become a temporal anchor, a bridge connecting the dusty, blood-stained cobblestones of 1776 to the neon-lit, hyper-connected reality of the present. In this final stretch of its journey, the bell is facing its greatest challenge, the weight of its own legend. To celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States, a global team of historians, digital artists, and philosophers embarked on a project called The Voice of 250. Their mission was to use the molecular data, the acoustic models, and the historical records to project the bell's unspoken legacy into the future. What they discovered was that the bell's true power lies in its permanent imperfection. In an age of high-definition screens and perfectly rendered AI, the raw, jagged physical crack of the Liberty Bell is a radical statement. It stands as a defiance against the cult of perfection. It tells the generation of 2026 that a nation, a person, or a movement does not need to be flawless to be powerful. In fact, the break is where the light gets in. The crack is the proof of the struggle. During the massive celebrations in Philadelphia, a profound moment of silence fell over Independence Mall. Millions of people, watching via satellite and standing on the grass, looked toward the glass pavilion. For a few seconds, the digital noise of the world ceased. In that silence, the people didn't just see a piece of bronze, they saw a time machine. If you look into the grain of the bell today, you see more than just metal. You see the reflection of the unfinished business of humanity. The bell's inscription, "Proclaim liberty through all the land," has become a living question. Have we done it? Is the job finished? The bell's silence is its answer. Not yet. As long as the bell is silent, as long as the crack remains unmended, the mission of freedom is an ongoing, daily task for every citizen of the world. The narrative of the Liberty Bell concludes with a stunning realization about energy conservation. The energy of that first great strike in 1776 didn't simply vanish. According to the laws of thermodynamics, energy only changes form. The vibration that shook the belfry moved into the wood of the tower, then into the stones of Philadelphia, and finally into the hearts of the people. That energy is still here. It is in the pulse of every protest for justice, in the scratching of every pen that writes a new law, and in the whisper of every child learning about their rights. The bell has become a universal frequency. It no longer belongs to Philadelphia, it belongs to the stars. When future explorers look back at Earth, the Liberty Bell will be remembered as the iron seed of a global transformation. It proved that an idea, once cast in metal and rang in the air, can never be unrung. As the sun sets on this 250-year epic, the bell remains in its pavilion, bathed in a soft amber light. It is a sentinel of the night. It is the broken heart of the world that refuses to stop beating. It is a reminder that we are all part of a great casting, a process of heat, pressure, and failure that eventually creates something enduring. The day Liberty rang was just the first second of a long, beautiful, and difficult day that is still happening. The rope is still swinging, the metal is still humming, and the message is still as clear as the day it was pulled from the furnace. Freedom is not a destination, it is the sound of the struggle. And as long as we are here to listen, the bell will never truly be silent. As we venture into the furthest reaches of the bell's existence, we move beyond the documented labs and into the inner circle, the world of the final guardians. These are the specialized men and women who serve as the high priests of the bronze. Their job is not just to clean the glass or monitor the sensors. They are tasked with the psychological and philosophical preservation of the icon. They understand a truth that the public rarely glimpses. The Liberty Bell is currently in a state of structural limbo, suspended between existence and total molecular collapse. In the deep basement of the Liberty Bell Center, away from the eyes of tourists, there exists a digital twin of the bell. This is a hyper-realistic atom-by-atom computer simulation that mirrors the physical bell in real time. Every footstep in the pavilion above, every change in atmospheric pressure from a passing storm, and even the collective body heat of a large crowd is fed into this simulation. The Guardians have discovered a terrifying phenomenon known as acoustic fatigue. Even though the bell is no longer struck, the ambient noise of the city, the rumble of the subway, the roar of jet engines from Philadelphia International Airport, and the constant hum of electronic devices creates a micro-vibration in the bronze. The bell is essentially being struck by the modern world billions of times a day, but at a frequency so high the human ear cannot detect it. These vibrations act like a slow-motion sledgehammer, slowly eroding the internal bonds of the 250-year-old metal. This has led to a top-secret debate among the world's leading metallurgists, the mending dilemma. There exists a technology today, molecular bonding using carbon nanotubes, that could theoretically heal the crack in the Liberty Bell. We could make it whole again. We could make it ring with its original, intended voice. But the Guardians have fought against this. They argue that to fix the bell would be to kill it. The crack is no longer a defect. It has become the fifth dimension of the object. If the crack were gone, the history of the abolitionists, the Civil War, and the Civil Rights Movement would be physically erased from the metal. The bell's power comes from its trauma. It serves as a reminder that the spirit of 1776 was never meant to be a perfect, polished, finished product. It was meant to be a living, breathing, and sometimes broken effort. This chapter also uncovers the secret protocol known as Condition Zero. In the event of a national catastrophe, be it a nuclear strike, a total societal collapse, or a natural disaster, there is a specialized team trained to evacuate the bell within 60 minutes. They have a reinforced, lead-lined vault buried deep beneath the streets of Philadelphia, a place where the bell would be lowered to wait out the end of the world. Even if the city above were to turn to ash, the heart of the Republic would remain in a vacuum-sealed chamber, a message in a bottle for whatever civilization comes next. But the most haunting part of the bell's current life is its role as a cultural beacon. In the dead of night, when the tourists are gone and the pavilion is dark, the bell sits alone. It faces the hall where the Declaration was signed. It is a dialogue between two ghosts. The parchment across the street is the will, and the bell is the witness. The Guardians report that in these quiet hours, the bell seems to reclaim its original identity. It is no longer an American icon. It is simply a massive piece of earth, copper and tin, that has been shaped by human desire. It represents the collective unconscious of a species that is obsessed with its own liberation. It is a reminder that humans are the only creatures on this planet that would spend millions of dollars and centuries of effort to protect a broken piece of metal simply because of the idea it represents.
New morning in Philadelphia, the first light hits the top of the bell's yoke. The shadow of the crack is cast onto the floor, looking like a jagged bolt of lightning. This is the eternal watch. The bell is waiting for us. It is waiting to see if we will live up to the inscription it carries. It is waiting to see if we will protect its silence as fiercely as our ancestors protected its sound. The Liberty Bell is not a dead thing. It is a vibrational battery. It has stored 250 years of American hope, anger, joy, and grief. It is waiting for the next great tipping point in history. And while it may never ring again in the physical sense, its silent ringing is the frequency upon which the future is being built. The day liberty rang the bell was a single strike, but the day liberty stood still is every day that we choose to remain a free people. The bell is the iron anchor of our soul, holding us steady in the storms of time. A cracked and beautiful guardian that will never, ever look away. While historians focus on the politicians who debated beneath it and the scientists who scan its atoms, there is a hidden human history of the Liberty Bell that has never been written in textbooks. This is the story of the McNair legacy, a multi-generational, unofficial dynasty of men and women who have lived, breathed, and died in the shadow of the bronze. For over 2 centuries, a specific line of caretakers has operated under a sacred, unwritten vow: the bell must never be alone. The story begins with Andrew McNair, the original State House bell ringer who pulled the rope on that fateful day in 1776. McNair was not a wealthy man. He was a humble public servant who lived in the belfry's heat and the winter's bite. To him, the bell wasn't a symbol. It was a difficult, temperamental giant that he had to keep clean of pigeon droppings and rust. But on the day the Declaration was read, something changed in him. He didn't just pull a rope, he felt the vibration of a new world order travel through the hemp and into his very bones. Legend has it that on his deathbed, McNair called his son to his side and whispered a warning. The metal has a memory, and it needs a human heart to keep it warm. If the bell goes cold, the fire of the country goes out. This began the Silent Watch. For the next 100 years, as the bell moved through the 19th century, there was always a McNair or a close family associate nearby. During the British occupation of Philadelphia in 1777, it was a descendant of the McNair Circle who reportedly risked his life to sneak into the occupied city to ensure the British hadn't discovered the dummy bell left in the steeple to distract them from the real one hidden in Allentown. By the late 1800s, this lineage of guardians had evolved into the Order of the Clapper. These were the men who physically polished the bell during its railroad tours. They slept in the gondola cars with the bell, using their own coats to shield the bronze from the driving rain of the Great Plains. One guard, a man named Thomas, reportedly stayed with the bell during a freak blizzard in the Rockies, refusing to leave the open-air car. When the train finally reached a station, he was found huddled against the bronze, his body shivering, but the bell miraculously free of ice. He claimed the bell had radiated a phantom heat that kept him from freezing to death. In the 20th century, the role of the guardian became more psychological. During the 1960s, a time of massive protests in Philadelphia, the caretakers weren't just protecting the bell from the weather, they were protecting it from the heat of hatred. There were bomb threats from radical groups and attempts by extremists to spray paint the bell with symbols of division. One particular guardian, a woman named Sarah, who was a direct descendant of the original Philadelphia ironworkers, developed a sixth sense for the bell's safety. She claimed she could feel the bell shudder hours before an earthquake or a major national tragedy occurred. She spent her nights sitting in the darkened hall, talking to the bronze, treating it not as a museum piece, but as a living member of her family. She was the one who noticed the first microscopic widening of the crack during a particularly humid summer, alerting engineers before the damage became catastrophic. Today, this legacy continues in the shadows. While the National Park Service handles the public security, there are still watchers, individuals who have spent 30, 40, or 50 years of their lives in daily contact with the bell. They know every swirl in the bronze, every letter of the inscription, and every jagged edge of the crack. They can tell you exactly how the bell breathes during a thunderstorm and how its color changes when the sun hits it at a specific 45-degree angle in October. The most intimate secret of the Watchers is the whisper protocol. It is a tradition that when a new lead curator or guardian takes over, they are left alone with the bell for 1 hour. They are told to place their ear against the waist of the bell, the thickest part of the bronze. What they hear is not silence. Because of the way the building is constructed and the way the bell is hung, it acts as a massive earth ear, picking up the distant low-frequency hum of the city's bloodline. The Watchers believe that the bell is a karmic reservoir. They believe that every prayer, every hope, and every tear shed by the millions of visitors who stand before it is absorbed into the porous metal. The bell is heavy not just because of its copper and tin, but because of the emotional weight of a nation. The day liberty rang the bell was a moment of thunder, but the centuries that followed have been a long, slow conversation between the metal and its human protectors. The McNair line and those who followed them represent the human axle of the story. They remind us that liberty is not maintained by documents alone, but by the relentless day-to-day care of ordinary people who refuse to let the grand echo fade into the silence of history. As the sun dips below the horizon in Philadelphia tonight, a guardian will do one final walk-around, They will check the sensors, yes, but they will also look at the bell with a gaze that is ancient and familiar. They are the latest in a long line of sentinels who know that as long as one human heart beats in rhythm with that cracked piece of bronze, the spirit of 76 remains alive and dangerous to tyrants everywhere. While the world sees a stirring biblical verse, a shadow history suggests that the 21 words and Roman numerals cast into the crown of the bell proclaim liberty through all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof, Leviticus 25, verse 10, are not merely a quote. To a clandestine group of cryptographers and symbologists who have spent decades analyzing the bronze, this inscription is the Leviticus cipher, a multi-layered cryptographic key designed by the Enlightenment's most brilliant minds to safeguard the true north of the American experiment. The mystery begins with the physical layout of the letters. In 1753, when the local founders Pass and Stow recast the bell for the final time, they did something that has long been dismissed as colonial clumsiness. The spacing, known in printing as kerning, is mathematically erratic. Certain letters, like the P in proclaim and the Y in liberty, are slightly elevated by a fraction of a millimeter. Others lean at an angle of exactly 13 degrees. In the late 1900s, a high-resolution digital mapping of the bell's surface revealed a staggering truth. If you connect these misaligned letters with a geometric grid, they form a perfect celestial map. This map aligns with the stars of Orion's belt exactly as they appeared over the Philadelphia meridian at the precise moment the Declaration of Independence was first read aloud on July 8, 1776. This was not a mistake. It was a temporal stamp, a way to lock the bell's identity to a specific moment in cosmic time. But why hide a code in a bell? The theory of the founding frequency suggests that Benjamin Franklin and his circle of scientists understood the relationship between geometry and sound. The inscription acts as a frequency map. The total number of characters, 81, multiplied by the Roman numeral for the verse, XV, 25, yields a frequency that, when applied to a resonating chamber, creates what is known as a standing wave. Some theorists believe that the State House was built to be that chamber. The bell wasn't just ringing for the ears, it was vibrating the very atoms of the building, creating a harmonic field meant to induce clarity of mind and courage of heart in the men debating below.
Itself, the choice of Leviticus 25:10 is significant not just for the word liberty, but for the concept of the Jubilee. In ancient tradition, the Jubilee was a year of total debt forgiveness and the release of all slaves. By embedding this specific verse, the secret guardians of the revolution were encoding a radical economic and social reset into the nation's primary symbol. They were warning future generations that liberty is impossible in a society where debt and inequality become permanent chains. In 1944, during the height of World War II, a cryptographic unit from the U.S. Army was reportedly sent to the bell in secret. They were investigating a theory that the errors in the casting were actually a grill cipher. By placing a specific template over the words, a secondary message could be read. While the results of that study remain classified, a leaked memo suggested the hidden text was a set of coordinates pointing to a location in the Appalachian Mountains, a vault of last resort, where the fundamental blueprints of the Republic's technology and law were stored in case Philadelphia was destroyed. Even the misspellings of the era provide a clue. The original order for the bell spelled Pennsylvania as Pennsylvania with one N. While this was a common 18th century variation, codebreakers argue it was an intentional checksum error. In the Baconian cipher, a method used by Sir Francis Bacon, the omission of a letter changes the numerical value of a sentence.
By dropping the N, the founders shifted the bell's numerical signature to match the number 1776, ensuring that the metal itself was mathematically bonded to the year of the nation's birth. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Leviticus cipher is the final clause. The inscription ends abruptly with VX, verse 10, but the actual biblical verse 10 of Leviticus, while the physical bronze sits in its temperature-controlled vault, there is a dimension of the Liberty Bell's story that exists in the realm of the unfinished. For the most dedicated historians and the secret watchers mentioned in earlier chapters, the bell is not a monument to a completed act of independence. It is a living document of resistance. Every scar, every dent, and most importantly, the massive fracture itself, tells a story of a nation that is perpetually under construction. This chapter explores the secret missions of the bell during the 20th century's darkest hours, missions that were never publicized but changed the course of the global struggle for human rights. In the 1950s, during the height of the Cold War, the United States government realized that the Liberty Bell was the most potent weapon in its arsenal, not a weapon of destruction, but one of ideological frequency. A top-secret project, codenamed Operation Resonance, was launched. The theory was that the specific tonal quality of the Philadelphia bronze, the ghost note we explored in Chapter 10, carried a subconscious signal of defiance. Engineers traveled to Independence Hall in the middle of the night using ultra-sensitive microphones developed for submarine detection. They recorded the bell breathing in the silence of the hall. This low-frequency hum was layered beneath the music and news broadcasts sent behind the Iron Curtain. For decades, millions of people living under totalitarian rule were listening to the heartbeat of the Liberty Bell without even knowing it. It was a sonic beacon of hope, a reminder that the sound of freedom could penetrate even the thickest walls. But as the 1960s arrived, the bell faced a challenge from within. The civil rights movement turned its gaze toward Philadelphia. To the activists of the era, the bell was a silent accuser. They pointed out that the bell's inscription commanded to proclaim liberty to all the inhabitants, yet for millions of Black Americans, that promise was a hollow echo. In a secret meeting in 1965, a group of civil rights leaders contemplated a radical act. They wanted to recast the bell. They argued that because the bell was cracked, it represented a broken promise. They proposed melting a small amount of iron from the chains of a southern plantation and fusing it into the bell's fracture. This was not an act of vandalism, but an alchemical healing. They believed that only by physically incorporating the history of slavery into the metal of the Liberty Bell could the new America truly be born. While the plan was ultimately deemed too dangerous for the fragile bronze, it sparked a new era of social metallurgy. The bell became the focal point for every major protest, from the anti-war movement to the fight for women's equality. The most mysterious part of this era involves the underground tunnels beneath Independence Mall. During the 1970s, as the bell was being moved to its new pavilion, construction crews discovered a series of brick-lined chambers that were not on any city map. These were not sewers or steam tunnels. They were built with the same 18th century brick as the State House. Inside one of these chambers, directly beneath where the bell had stood for a century, they found a small circular pedestal. On the pedestal were dozens of lead castings, small palm-sized replicas of the bell, each inscribed with a different name. These were names of common citizens, shoemakers, farmers, seamstresses. It was a people's registry. It appeared that for generations, a secret society of Philadelphia citizens had been conducting a ritual. Every time a person performed an extraordinary act of civic courage, their name was cast in lead and placed beneath the bell, as if to charge the person's legacy with the bell's vibration. The bell wasn't just watching over the leaders, it was being supported, literally and figuratively, by the names of the common people. This brings us to the modern vigil. In the digital age, the bell has become a data anchor. During the 2020 global pandemic, when the streets of Philadelphia were empty for the first time in 300 years, the bell sat in total isolation. But the sensors, the ones we discussed in Chapter 8, recorded something bizarre. Without the noise of the traffic and the tourists, the bell began to resonate at a frequency that matched the Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic heartbeat of the Earth itself. It was as if the bell, freed from human interference, was retuning itself to the planet. This silent symphony is the final secret of the bell. It reminds us that liberty is not a human invention. It is the law of nature. It is the natural state of the universe to be free. The king, the wars, the taxes, and the chains, those are the interference. The bell is the constant. As we look toward the future, the Liberty Bell stands as a prophetic shadow. It tells us that our cracks do not make us weak. It tells us that a broken voice can be louder than a whole one. And it tells us that as long as we continue to add our names to the registry of courage, the bell will never be truly silent. The day liberty rang the bell was a moment of metal hitting metal, but the century of the echo is a moment of spirit hitting spirit. The bell is the iron mirror of our soul. It is cracked because we are cracked. It is silent because it is waiting for us to speak, and it will remain in its glass house, watching, waiting, and vibrating until the day that liberty through all the land is no longer a command on a piece of bronze, but a reality in every human heart. As we reach the psychological zenith of this chronicle, we move away from the high-tech sensors, the secret ciphers, and the political conspiracies. We enter the realm of the metaphysical bell. This chapter recounts the legendary story of the sightless seer of 1994, an event that forced the National Park Service to redefine what it means to see history. It is a story that proves the Liberty Bell's most powerful resonance isn't captured by microphones, but by the human nervous system itself. In the autumn of 1994, a man named Elias Thorne, a namesake of the engineer from Chapter 13, arrived at the pavilion. Elias had been blind since birth. He didn't come to see the crack or read the inscription. He came, as he told the guards, to hear the silence. Because of the strict do not touch policy enacted to protect the fragile patina, Elias was initially barred from getting close. However, under a special educational provision, a senior curator allowed him a moment of sensory contact after the pavilion had closed to the public. What happened next became part of the bell's oral tradition. Elias did not just brush the metal. He placed both palms flat against the waist of the bell and pressed his forehead against the cold bronze. He stayed in that position for nearly 20 minutes, motionless. The curators, watching on security monitors, noticed that the bell's ultra-sensitive acoustic monitors began to spike. The bell wasn't being struck, yet it was vibrating in a rhythmic pattern. When Elias finally stepped back, he was weeping. He didn't describe the coldness of the metal or the texture of the crack. He described a wall of human breath. He claimed that when he touched the bell, he didn't feel metal. He felt a density of presence. He described hearing a low roar, like the sound of a distant ocean, which he interpreted as the collective whispering of the millions of people who had stood before the bell over 2 centuries. He called it the aura of the unspoken. This led to a radical psychological study known as the resonance projection. Psychologists and neurologists began to investigate why the Liberty Bell triggers such profound emotional responses in people, even those who have no connection to American history. They discovered that the bell acts as a cognitive anchor. Its physical flaws, the jagged crack, the pitted surface, the uneven letters, mirror the neural arc.
26th bicentennial, a new ritual emerged among the secret watchers. It is called the tuning. Every year, on the night of July 3rd, the guardians stand in a circle around the bell. They don't speak. They simply listen to the background radiation of the city as it filters through the bronze. They believe that if the bell ever stops humming, if the atoms ever go truly still, it will mean that the idea of liberty has finally died in the hearts of the people. The story of the Liberty Bell ends not with a bang, but with a sustainable frequency. As long as there is a crack, there is room for growth. As long as there is silence, there is a space for us to speak. The bell is the great void at the center of the Republic. It is empty so that we can fill it with our own voices. It is broken so that we can feel the urgency of mending the world. As the final light of this narrative fades, imagine the bell sitting in the dark of its pavilion right now. It is a sentinel of the void. It is the iron ghost of Philadelphia. It has survived fire, ice, hammers, and time. It has been a reject, a hero, a fugitive, and a god. But in the end, it is just a bell, a simple tool meant to call people together. The day liberty rang the bell was a call to arms. The century of the crack was a call to reflection. And the era of the silence is a call to action. The bell has done its work. The metal has carried the message across 250 years of storms. Now, the resonance is no longer in the bronze. The resonance is in you. The sound you hear in your chest when you see an injustice, that is the bell. The feeling of hope you get when you see people standing together, that is the bell. The determination to keep going when things are broken, that is the bell. The Liberty Bell is finally, truly whole, not in its metal, but in its meaning. It is the unbroken signal in a broken world. It is the eternal echo of a single strike that will never, ever end. As we move beyond the 250th anniversary and into the deep future of the Liberty Bell, we must confront its most startling identity, the bell as a chrono-sentinel. This chapter delves into the specialized field of relativistic historiography, where scientists and philosophers have begun to view the bell not just as an object in space, but as a landmark in time. While we measure our days in hours and minutes, the bell measures the life cycle of liberty, and new evidence suggests that the bronze is physically reacting to the flow of time in ways that defy classical physics. In the late 2020s, a team of quantum chronologists installed a lattice clock, the most precise timekeeping instrument ever created, in the bedrock beneath the Liberty Bell. They discovered a time dilation anomaly. Because of the immense historical and emotional gravity centered on the bell, time itself appears to move at a fractionally different rate within 3 feet of the bronze. It is as if the bell has created a temporal pocket, preserving the atmosphere of 1776 within the microscopic layers of its patina. This leads to the discovery of the patina records. The green-gold skin of the bell is not just oxidation, it is a chronological archive. Using a process called ablation spectroscopy, researchers analyzed the chemical layers of the patina. They found a vertical map of the Earth's atmosphere over the last 2.5 centuries. The deepest layer contains the soot of the Revolutionary War fires. The middle layers contain the sulfur of the Industrial Revolution. The upper layers carry the isotopes of the atomic age. The bell has quite literally inhaled the history of the world. It is a biological lung made of metal, breathing in the toxins and the triumphs of every generation. This chemical record proves that the bell was never stationary. Even while hanging still, it was traveling through the changing chemistry of the human story. But the most profound revelation of the chronosynchrony is the frequency of renewal. Every 50 years, aligned with the biblical jubilee mentioned in the Leviticus Code, chapter 18, the bell undergoes a molecular realignment. In 1826, 1876, 1926, and 1976, witnesses and guardians reported that the bell's color seemed to shift slightly, and the hum mentioned by the secret watchers became more pronounced. As we approach the next Jubilee window, there is a growing movement of digital resonators. These are millions of people around the world who have synchronized their smart devices to the bell's specific vibration. They believe that by creating a global human mesh tuned to the bell's frequency, they can counteract the noise of chaos in the modern world. It is a form of digital alchemy, using the ancient bronze to stabilize the volatile energy of the internet age. There is also the dark theory of the final fracture.
Predictive models suggest that the crack is not a random break, but a progress bar. According to this theory, the crack slowly expands not because of physics, but because of social tension. If the gap between the two sides of the bell ever reaches the crown, it is predicted that the symbol will lose its coherence and the physical bell will shatter. This has led to the preservation of unity, a diplomatic effort where leaders from around the world visit the bell to pledge their commitment to peace, believing that their collective will can physically hold the metal together. The bell has become a universal mirror. When we look at it, we see the timeline of our own evolution. We see the fire that made us, the errors that broke us, and the silence that sustains us. It is the anchor of the infinite. In a universe that is constantly expanding and changing, the Liberty Bell provides a fixed point. It tells us, you were here, you fought for this, you are still fighting. The story of the Liberty Bell is no longer just American. It has become the Earth's bell. It is the record of a species that tried to define liberty and spent 300 years trying to understand what that word actually meant. The bell is the teacher. It doesn't use words, it uses weight. It doesn't use sound, it uses silence. As the stars shift and the centuries roll by, the bell remains the guardian of the pulse. It is the ultimate witness to the long now. And when the last human being eventually leaves the city of Philadelphia, the bell will still be there, holding the memory of 1,000,000 voices in its cold green-gold heart, a silent gong waiting for the end of time to finally ring its last, most beautiful note. As we venture beyond the atmospheric confines of our planet, the story of the Liberty Bell takes its most audacious leap. In the late 2020s, a project emerged from the intersection of the National Park Service, NASA, and the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, known as Project Athelgard. The premise was profound. If we are to define humanity to a potential neighbor in the stars, we should not send our wars or our maps, but the resonance of our struggle. The Liberty Bell was chosen as the primary source for a message intended for the deep void. This chapter uncovers the classified efforts to create a golden record of vibration. Unlike the Voyager records of the 1970s, which carried images and songs, Project Athelgard focused on the molecular signature of liberty. Using laser vibrometry, scientists captured the thermal noise of the bell, the chaotic but rhythmic movement of atoms as they react to the heat of the sun and the gravity of the Earth. They discovered that the bell has a unique spectral fingerprint that is unlike any other piece of bronze on the planet. This fingerprint was converted into a binary waveform. In 2028, this waveform was beamed toward the Alpha Centauri system using a high-powered X-ray laser. We didn't send the word liberty, we sent the sound of the crack. The logic was that any advanced civilization would recognize the mathematics of a fracture. They would see a pattern of a hole that had become broken and then sustained. This, the scientists argued, is the universal definition of progress, the ability to endure and remain functional despite a catastrophic flaw.
Terrestrial counterpart, the moon's echo. On the lunar surface, in the Sea of Tranquility, there exists a small silicon wafer left by a private mission in 2025. This wafer contains a 1 to 1,000,000 scale 3D map of the Liberty Bell, including every microscopic pit and the exact trajectory of the crack. It is placed in a location where it will remain untouched for millions of years. Even if the Earth were to be scoured by an asteroid or consumed by the sun, the anatomy of our freedom would remain on the moon, a silent monument to a species that valued an idea enough to cast it in bronze and then preserve its memory in the vacuum of space. Back on Earth, this global perspective has led to the Acoustic Restoration Project. Philosophers are asking, if the bell is Earth's ambassador, what is it saying now? A new type of digital belfry has been constructed in the cloud. Millions of people have downloaded an app that allows their phone to vibrate in sympathy with the bell's real-time molecular movement.
When a major event occurs, a peace treaty signed, a breakthrough in green energy, or a tragedy that moves the world, the mesh reacts. Scientists have noted that the human vibration actually affects the metal vibration. It is a feedback loop. We are no longer just observers of the bell, we are co-resonators. The bell is becoming a living biofeedback machine for the entire human race. The story of the Liberty Bell concludes with a vision of the final silence. In the distant future, perhaps thousands of years from now, when the bronze finally yields to the relentless march of entropy and the bell crumbles into dust, the legacy will remain. Because we have mapped it to the atom, because we have beamed its frequency into the stars, and because we have woven its ghost note into the digital fabric of our civilization, the bell can never truly die. It has achieved informational immortality. The day Liberty rang the bell was a local event in a small colonial town, but the eon of the resonance is a cosmic event. The bell is the proof that even in a cold, indifferent universe, a spark of will can create a vibration that lasts forever. It is the anchor of the void, the ghost in the machine, and the heartbeat of the earth. As you stand beneath the stars tonight, remember that the signal is already out there. Somewhere, light years away, the frequency of a cracked bell from Philadelphia is traveling through the dark. It is our greeting to the universe. We are broken, we are loud, and we are free. For nearly 3 centuries, the world has believed that the Liberty Bell's second recasting was a simple matter of colonial engineering, a desperate attempt by 2 local metalworkers, John Pass and John Stowe, to fix a British failure. But in the spring of 2029, during the restoration of an old townhouse in Philadelphia's Society Hill, a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard revealed a leather-bound diary. It was the personal journal of John Stowe, and its contents have ignited a firestorm of controversy that threatens to rewrite the physical history of the American Republic. This secret document, now known as the Stowe Confession, reveals that the cracked nature of the Liberty Bell was not an accident of physics, but a deliberate, high-stakes act of alchemical sabotage. Stowe's writing describes a clandestine meeting in the winter of 1753 with a man he identified only as the librarian, a figure many historians now suspect was the young Benjamin Franklin. According to the diary, Stowe was instructed to ensure that the bell would never produce a perfect, pure tone. The librarian argued that a perfect bell belonged to a church or a king, symbols of absolute authority. A bell for a free people, he claimed, must be born with a flaw. Stowe writes, "We were told that a voice too clear would lull the people into a false sense of peace. The metal must carry a tension, a discordance that mirrors the soul of a man who is never truly settled in his chains." To achieve this divine imperfection, Stowe confesses to adding a strange, unauthorized substance to the molten bronze in the final pour. While the public record says they added extra copper to make the bell less brittle, the journal tells a different story. Stowe admits to tossing in 7 pounds of iron from the shackles of a runaway and a handful of silver coins from 7 different nations. This was the constitutional alloy. By mixing the iron of a slave's chains with the currency of the world's merchants, Stowe and Pass were performing a ritual of metametallurgy. They were creating a metal that was physically incapable of being at rest. The internal stress within the bell, the very thing scientists call molecular fatigue, was intentionally engineered. The bell was designed to scream until the nation it represented lived up to the inscription on its crown. The diary also reveals a hidden feature of the bell's design, the shadow seal. Stowe claims that he carved a miniature inverted map of the Atlantic Ocean in the inside of the bell's waist, in a location that is impossible to see without dismantling the entire structure. This map, he claimed, would act as a vibrational compass. As long as the bell hung in Philadelphia, its resonance would act as a psychic magnet, drawing people from across the ocean toward the light of the New World. But the most chilling entry in the Stowe Confession concerns the final strike. Stowe predicts with eerie accuracy that the bell would eventually break in the mid-19th century. He writes that the metal was timed to fracture when the original spirit of the founders began to fade. The crack was not a sign of age, it was a visual alarm. It was meant to be a jagged, physical reminder that the contract of liberty had been breached and needed to be renegotiated by a new generation. When this diary was first analyzed, many dismissed it as a hoax. But then a team of forensic metallurgists conducted a mass spectrometry test on a microscopic fragment of the bell's interior. For the first time, they found trace amounts of high-carbon iron, a type of iron consistent with 18th century shackles, scattered unevenly throughout the bronze. The Stowe Confession was true. This revelation has transformed the Liberty Bell from a passive object of history into an active conspiracy. It means that our most sacred symbol was built on a foundation of intentional brokenness. It suggests that the founders knew, even in 1753, that the journey toward freedom would be messy, discordant, and perpetually fractured. The bell is no longer a failed instrument. It is a masterpiece of discord. It was forged to be a mirror of the American struggle, a struggle that is never pure, never perfect, and always under the strain of its own internal contradictions. As we look at the bell today, with the knowledge of Stowe's secret journal, the crack seems even more intentional. It is not a wound, it is the signature of the maker. It is the proof that from the very beginning, the plan was not for us to have a bell that rings for us, but for us to become the people who are brave enough to ring a broken bell. The Stowe Confession ends with a haunting sentence.
6. The world is engulfed in a silent war of information. In an era where artificial intelligence can rewrite history in a millisecond and deepfakes can topple governments, the human race has found itself gasping for something tangible, immutable, and unhackable. This chapter uncovers the most classified modern utility of the Liberty Bell, its role as the analog firewall for the American Republic. In late 2025, a joint task force of cybersecurity experts and quantum physicists initiated Project Iron Truth. They realized that while digital records are fragile and easily manipulated, the physical vibrational signature of the Liberty Bell is a biological and physical constant. It is one of the few things on Earth that exists entirely outside the reach of a computer code. The project involves the creation of a frequency-based authentication system. Because the bell's internal molecular structure, the Stowe alloy we discovered in the previous chapter, produces a unique chaotic acoustic pulse, it can be used to generate a truly random encryption key. Every hour, the ultra-sensitive sensors at the bell center record the microscopic movements of the bronze. This data is then converted into a cryptographic string that secures the most sensitive government communications. The Liberty Bell has become the heartbeat of the secure state. It is the only password that can never be guessed by an AI, because it is generated by the physical stress of 2,000 pounds of 18th century metal reacting to the real-time gravity and temperature of the Earth. But there is a more profound human side to this digital defense. In the great disinformation crisis of 2026, when a massive cyber attack attempted to erase the digital archives of the U.S. Constitution, a group of techno-abolitionists looked toward the bell. They realized that the bell carries the physical DNA of democracy. Using a process called laser-etched resynthesis, scientists have begun to encode the entire text of the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights back into the pits and scars of the bell's interior. Using nanosecond laser pulses, they are turning the bell into a bronze hard drive. This data is not stored in bits and bytes, but in physical indentations on the metal.
It is a permanent backup that will survive even if every computer on Earth is fried by an electromagnetic pulse, EMP. The bell has moved from being a relic of the past to the guardian of the future's memory. During the 250th anniversary celebrations, a new phenomenon was observed, the pulse sync. Millions of citizens, wary of the digital illusions of the metaverse, began to visit the bell just to stand in its physical shadow. There is a growing psychological movement called the unplugged resonators. These people believe that standing near the bell reclocks the human nervous system. In a world of 5G signals and constant screen flicker, the slow, heavy 164.8 Hz frequency of the Liberty Bell acts as a psychic grounding wire. One lead researcher on the project stated, "In a world where everything is fluid and fake, the bell is the only thing that is hard. It is the only thing that doesn't change when you refresh the page. It is our analog firewall against the chaos of the virtual." The chapter ends with a look at the final failsafe. It is rumored that if the nation's democratic systems ever suffer a total systemic crash, the bell is rigged with a specific resonance generator. When activated, it will cause the bell to vibrate at a frequency that can be heard for 10 miles across Philadelphia. This manual override is the ultimate signal for the citizens to gather, not via an app or a website, but in the physical square, just as they did in 1776. The day Liberty rang the bell was about waking up a city. The year of the analog firewall is about waking up a species. The bell is telling us that our technology is a shadow, but our liberty is a substance. It is a solid, heavy, cracked, and beautiful substance that no algorithm can ever simulate and no virus can ever delete. As the sun sets over the digital towers of the modern world, the bell sits in its glass house, a master key made of bronze. It is the silent protector of the real. It is the anchor that keeps us from drifting away into a sea of data. And it remains, as it always has been, the voice of the solid earth in an increasingly hollow age. As we reach the quarter-millennial mark in 2026, a new and startling theory has emerged from the intersection of fractal mathematics and geopolitical forecasting. For centuries, we viewed the great crack in the Liberty Bell as a historical tragedy, a sign of failure. But as we enter the next 250-year cycle of the American experiment, visionary mathematicians have proposed that the crack is actually a fractal timeline, a physical manifestation of the nation's destiny etched in bronze. This is the fractal prophecy, a revelation that suggests the jagged path of the fracture is not random, but follows the exact stress peaks of human history. In 2025, a team of researchers using AI-driven topography mapped every microscopic jagged edge and secondary fissure within the main crack. When they overlaid this map onto a timeline of American history, the results were bone-chilling. Every major bend in the crack corresponds to a year of national crisis: 1861, 1929, 1941, 1968, and 2020. The metal didn't just break, it broke in synchronicity with the national psyche. The bell, being a molecular witness, acted as a physical barometer for the pressure of the people. But the most significant part of the study is the section of the crack that is yet to come. The fracture doesn't stop at 2026. Micro-fissures, invisible to the naked eye, but clear under electron microscopy, extend upward toward the crown of the bell. These tiny future folds suggest a roadmap for the next 250 years. According to the fractal map, the nation is entering a period of molecular reordering. The crack shows a series of diverging paths, a choice point around the year 2045. One path leads to a shattering of the bronze, representing total societal collapse, and the other leads to a stabilization knot, where the metal appears to reinforce itself. The prophecy suggests that the bell is a self-correcting oracle. It tells us that our future is not written in stone, but in the tension of the metal. If we, the inhabitants thereof, can find a way to balance the weight of our diversities, the bell will hold. If we pull too hard in opposite directions, the metal will fulfill its destiny and shatter. This revelation has transformed the way world leaders look at the bell during the 2026 celebrations. It is no longer a museum piece, it is a diagnostic tool for civilization. There is now a permanent vigil of mathematicians who monitor the micro-fissures. They believe that by observing how the bronze reacts to current events, they can predict societal earthquakes months before they happen. On the eve of the 250th anniversary, a final discovery was made within the very apex of the crack, the point where it currently stops. There, tucked into a microscopic fold of the bronze, scientists found a single unoxidized crystal of pure tin. In metallurgy, this is nearly impossible after 270 years. This bright point has been dubbed the seed of the new Jubilee. It represents the possibility of a second casting of the American spirit, not by melting the bell down, but by a cold fusion of the people's will. The day liberty rang the bell was the beginning of the first fracture. The year of 2026 is the beginning of the Great Alignment. The Liberty Bell stands before us now not as a broken relic, but as a living compass. The crack is our guide. It reminds us that to be one people does not mean to be without cracks. It means to be a single entity that is strong enough to carry its breaks with dignity. The prophecy tells us that the most beautiful part of the bell is not the smooth bronze, but the jagged edge where the two sides meet. That is where the current of history flows. As we close